Another of the big new features in iOS 10 for developers was speech recognition, which allows apps to generate text from audio files and also from live input. The first is pretty easy to use, the second a little trickier. We're going to see how to do both in this video. So, as always, let's jump over to Xcode and create a new project. Speech recognition can only be done on a real device, so you'll be able to follow along with this tutorial if you don't have a real device running iOS 10, but you will need one to actually run the app. So we're going to start off seeing how we can use speech recognition on a file, and for that of course we'll need some kind of file to do speech recognition on. So you can get any kind of file with some audio on it that you like, but if you need one, then you can go to iosdevelopercourse.com/course content 10/test.wav, and that will just download a simple WAV file with some text on it. Testing 1 2 3. Wonderful. So go to File, Save Page As, and then that will give you the option to save the file, and I'll just save it there on the desktop. Okay, back over to Xcode, and then let's drag that new file in. Test.wav, and bring it in the usual way. There we go. All right, so we'll need a new framework, which is going to be the speech module, which allows us to access all of these speech and voice recognition functions. And then we can do this in just a few lines of code. We first need to access the test.wav file. Now, we've done this before, but it was a while ago now, so you will be forgiven for not remembering. It's audio path, and then to access the audio path, we access the bundle and then the main area of the bundle, and then we want to get the path for a particular resource. That resource is called test, and it's of type WAV. And I'll actually just put that in an if let to make sure that just in case we have a problem finding that file, it won't crash the whole app. And then we'll create a URL from a file URL with path, and the path is of course audio path. So now we can access the file. We're going to create an SF speech recognizer, which we'll call recognizer. And this is going to be an SF speech recognizer. And then we're going to create a request, which is an SF speech URL recognition request with a URL of URL. And then we take our recognizer and we apply to it a recognition task with a result handler. So the task is request, and then I'll double click on that to get my sample code for the handler, and we should get one of two results, or two variables, result and error. And I'll do a quick check to see if result is not nil, then we'll print it, and I'm going to access result.best transcription dot formatted string. So that will give us the best guess at what the text is in this audio, but I'll also just print the whole result just so we can see what other information we get as well. And I'll run this on my device. I found that although this isn't using the microphone in any way, this doesn't work on the simulator at the time of recording this video. Feel free to try it out. That may change, but right now you do need a device to run this code. And there is one thing I've forgotten, and that is we need to request permission over in info.plist. So we'll add a row. And then type ns speech recognition usage description, and then whatever you want there. Something like to find out what you are saying. And then let's try that again. This time we should get a message popping up asking us if we want to allow the device to do speech recognition. Here we go. So we'll just click tap OK. And here we go. So you can see we've actually got several different results here. So it starts off with the first word, then testing, testing, then testing, testing 1, 2, testing, testing 1, 2, 3, and we get that last result a few times as well. So you do need to be aware of that you're not just waiting for the very end, but you actually get the results all the way through. Very usefully, it also gives you things like timestamps for the different words and the duration of those words and the confidence, so the percentage chance or the probability out of 1 that this is correct. So if you put in some unclear audio, then that number would go down from 0.973 to maybe 0.4, 0.5. So if you want to be sure that what you're doing does give you an accurate transcription, then you want to be looking at the confidence number there, as well as just the final result. Okay, so that's how we do basic speech recognition from a file. Live speech recognition is quite a bit trickier. And in fact, I'm going to create a new project for it, just so we set up everything from scratch. Here we go. And this time I'm going to make the change in info.plist before we start. So remember, we need to put in NS speech recognition usage description. So I'm just going to copy that over. Add it as a new row. And this time, to listen to what you are saying. Okay. Right, so this one's going to have a little bit of interaction with the user. So we're going to have a button. And I'll put this in the middle at the bottom of the screen. And that will be start recording. And this time I'm going to use a text view, which is much like a label, but it's designed for multiple lines of content. There we go. I'll empty the text view initially, and I'll make it a bit bigger as well. It's a little bit clearer what we're saying. Okay, let's now create some outlets and actions for our UI elements. So I'm going to control drag from the text view. I'll just call that text view. And then this one I'll call recording button. And then for the action, recording button tapped. Okay, that's it. So it's going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to tap on that button to start recording, and then if all goes well, the text that we are saying will appear in the text view. which has actually just reminded me we're going to need permission to use the microphone as well. So that's down in privacy and microphone. To record what you're saying. Okay. So as before, we're going to need a speech recognizer object to work with. So I'm going to define it up here so that we can access it in a number of different places, specifically in this method here and the viewDidLoad method. So speech recognizer, and this is going to be an SF speech recognizer, for which I'll need to import the speech module. There we go. And then in viewDidLoad, I'm going to get the permissions that we need. So first, I'm going to set the speech recognizer delegate to the view controller. And I'm actually going to force unwrap that so that it's not an optional. And we'll also need to add SF speech recognizer delegate to the view controller to allow the view controller to be the delegate for speech recognizer. And then we're going to take SF speech recognizer, so that's the class with a capital S at the beginning, and we're going to request authorization. So just as we've done with requesting location or camera access in the past, and this time we'll have a variable called auth status, and we'll add a little bit of code to control what the button says depending on the outcome of this request for authorization. So we'll have a switch running on auth status, and in the case that auth status is authorized, we'll set the recording button to enabled, which it will be by default anyway. But if the auth status comes back as denied, then we'll set the recording button to is enabled is false, and we'll need a self in here as well because we're in a closure. And in this case, we'll also set the recording button title to user denied access to speech recognition. And we want this for the disabled state. There we go. There's a couple of other cases as well. So if usage is restricted, i.e. if it's not allowed on this particular device, then we'll give them that message. And finally, it's possible that it's not determined, in which case we'll just say speech recognition has not yet been authorized. Okay, so we'll run that in a moment, but just before we do, I'm going to add a bit of code that will run this on the main queue. Remember, we've talked about queues a few times before, as this may not happen on the main thread, it could be very slow to update the UI. So to make that happen as quickly as possible, we'll use operation q.main.add operation, and then put all of that code inside that operation. All right, so let's just try that out. Obviously, we're not going to do any recording here, but make sure you're running it on a real device with iOS 10, and we'll just make sure that we're getting the right messages displaying and everything looks good so far. And here we go. So I'm going to tap OK, and you can see we've got our start recording button there. Of course, if I press that, then nothing happens yet, but everything seems to be in place. Great. So now let's actually write our code to start recording. So inside the recording button tapped method, notice that because we've set it up here to disable the button if we don't have permission or if something else is wrong, they can only tap the button if enabled is true. So we don't need to check for that here. So we're going to start by creating an audio session, which we're going to use to record our audio. So AV audio session dot shared instance. Then we set the audio session category. And this is going to be a category of AV audio session category record. So you can see we've got a number of options there we want to record, so we're going to choose that, and we'll need do, try, and catch as well. We're going to have several things that will need a try, so what I'm going to do is put a do at the beginning of all of this, and then a catch, and we'll just put a message saying handle errors there. And then we can have several different tries without having to have a separate do, try, and catch for each of them. So the next one is we're going to take our audio session and we're going to set the mode. And this one's going to be to AV audio session, if I can spell it right, mode measurement, which effectively minimizes the processing of the sound as it gets recorded, so it's as raw as possible, which is generally best for speech recognition. And then we'll again take our audio session and set it to active to be true. And we're going to want to notify others on deactivation, which allows us to monitor whether the audio session gets deactivated or not, which we'll do a little bit later on. Okay, so now we've set up our audio session. We've got a couple more variables that we're going to need. The first is a recognition request, which is going to be an SF speech audio buffer recognition request. So the audio buffer is essentially what's coming in through the microphone. So we're going to try and recognize the speech in that. And finally, we need an input node. And we're going to get that from our audio engine, which I'll define out here. And this is going to be an AV audio engine, which manages the whole of the audio input and output on the device. So our input node is our audio engine, dot input node. And that's an optional, so I'm going to put an if let around that too. Then we set one setting for recognition request, which is should report partial results. So we're going to set that to true. That's fairly straightforward. So that means that it reports the results of the speech recognition as the user is still speaking and doesn't wait till the end. All right, we're now ready to create our recognition task. Which is going to be a speech recognizer recognition task with a result handler. So the task is the recognition request, and then the result handler gives us a result, and if something goes wrong, it gives us an error message. Okay, and then we just check that we have a result. So if let result equals result, and if we do, we'll set the text view text to be equal to result, and then best transcription dot formatted string. And we're almost there. We just need to specify the recording format, which we get from the input node, and then the output format for bus and bus 0, so the default bus essentially. And then we take our input node and install a tap on the bus 0 with a buffer size of 1024, so that's a megabyte, it's about right. And the format is our recording format. And then we've got a block with a buffer and a time, which I'll call when. And then when that's done, we're going to add that to our recognition request. And then we prepare the audio engine. And finally, we start the audio engine. Phew. So that was a fair bit of work, but essentially all we're doing is setting up our audio session and then our recognition request to record the contents of the microphone and then process them with our speech recognizer. So let's give it a go. So I'm going to tap start recording, and it's requesting access to the microphone, which is a good sign. Hello, are you recording this? There we go. So it's working great, and it's recording and noting down everything I say. Wonderful. Now there's a couple of small issues that I'm going to improve. For example, we've still got the start recording button at the bottom of the screen there, even though we're already recording, which isn't great. And there's a couple of other potential problems that we've got. So let's just go through our code and tidy it up a little bit. But as you can see, we've got a actually pretty effective and pretty fast speech recognition system. So let's go back over to Xcode to just perfect things on the code side. So first off, the speech recognizer will automatically stop recognizing speech if it doesn't hear any speech for a certain time. We should take advantage of that and make it clear to the user what's happened. That will be reported in the result variable. So we can use if result.isFinal. And if it is, that will be the end of the recording. So firstly, we'll stop the audio engine. Then we'll take our input node and remove the tap on bus 0. And the other thing we need to do if we're finishing is update our button. So we'll do that when the recording button is tapped. So we'll first check to see if audio engine is running, and we'll deal with it not being running first, because if it's not running, we want to do all of this just as we've been doing before, but we also want to update that button. So we'll take recording button and set the title stop recording for the default state. And then if it is running, then we want to stop the recording. So we'll take our audio engine and stop it. And we're also going to want to end our recognition task and recognition request. So let's define those up here now with a var, and same with recognition task. But this time recognition task will be an SF speech recognition task. And we'll likely have to add in a self, there we go, to refer to that now that it's part of the view controller. So we'll take our recognition request and end the audio. And we'll also take our recognition task and cancel. And finally, we'll set the recording button title to start recording. Okay, so now we've just tidied things up a little bit and essentially made it so that when the recording starts, the button changes to a stop. And then if the user presses it during the recording process, it becomes a start button again. Similarly here, when the recording is finished, we're going to want to update the title of the button again to start recording with a self in there as well. Finally then, I'm going to add a single line to view to load, which will just take our button and set it to disabled until we've verified that we have the authorization to do the recording. Okay, so let's just try that again. It should work essentially the same as it did before. We haven't really changed the core code of the app, but we have made it a little bit more user-friendly, and we've made the starting and stopping of recording audio possible. So here we go. I'm going to start recording again, and with any luck you can see that it is still recording my voice. I need to make that button a bit wider because it's got a ... in the middle, but everything's working as it should be. And if I press the stop button, then it stops recording my voice, and I have the option to start it again if I want to. Great, so let's just very quickly change the width of the button. We'll go out to the full width of the screen, and then we're done. So as I said, a fair bit more complicated than just transcribing from an audio file, but also quite a bit more powerful. So I hope you think of some great ways to add this to your apps, and if you do, please let me know. I'm always excited to see what my students do with the latest iOS technologies.